Many of us, I think it's probably fair to say hundreds of people have been working for the last 7 years on something called the California Nitrogen Assessment. The manuscript is about that thick. We used to know how thick phone books were. That example doesn't work anymore, but really thick. So I'm going to be going at about 100 pages a minute in terms of what that manuscript is going to be about. But I just want to give you a taste of that and how it relates to the work that's going on here at the California Nitrogen Assessment. Four PIs, myself, Sonia, and Kate, who are here, and Randy Dahlgren, and also Mariah Cawley is working with us on getting the book done. Lots of collaborating institutions and lots of supporters, most noteworthy the Packard Foundation. So we're going to go through this chapter by chapter. There are 8 chapters. The first one gives sort of the background what an assessment is. So this might be surprising to you, but nobody had ever done any kind of a comprehensive assessment of nitrogen in California. And for all of you who've just been riding around on paleo, they also kind of appreciate how important it is. But we had fragments of information and lots of fragments, but how it all added up. So the idea was to get a better scientific basis for assessing the balance between the benefits of nitrogen and the costs of nitrogen leakages. The assessment is about options, not about making specific recommendations, about options in terms of practices and, importantly, also in terms of policies. And the idea is really to go to a new level in terms of linking science with action. That linking science with action comes in through stakeholder consultation. So what saves this from being the mother of all literature reviews is it's actually set up to answer questions from people like you. And at the beginning of the assessment, we spoke to hundreds of people representing lots of different stakeholder groups around the state. So what the assessment does is it's designed to answer their questions about what are the problems, what are the benefits, what are the options, what can we do about it? Okay, so part of the question actually starts at a very broad level of, well, maybe it's a problem now, but it's going to go away. Things are changing so fast. So we look at underlying drivers. So those are those big kind of megatrends that are what drives the whole system. And, you won't be surprised. There are basically 2 big drivers of nitrogen flows through the state of California. One is agriculture, the other is combustion of fossil fuels. Turns out that California does a really good job of regulating tailpipes and smokestacks, and we've actually tackled that nitrogen problems from combustion of fossil fuels very effectively. Now, be careful in interpreting that, because the way you regulate tailpipes and smokestacks doesn't work for agriculture. So, population increase, and especially prosperity around the world, is the source of the demand for much of what California produces. We're lucky we produce stuff that a lot of people in the world want to buy, especially as they get more money. So drought or no drought, a lot of the underlying factors that have been propelling California agriculture are going to, or in some kind of catastrophe, are going to continue to propel the kinds of things that we do. But in contrast to the air issues of fossil fuel combustion, we haven't had an effective policy set around nitrogen in agriculture. Okay. Now, going from those big meta drivers to the direct drivers within agriculture about farmer decision making, for example, there are a whole bunch. I had to drop some slides out for my sake, but just to hit the high points. So, fuel combustion continues to grow, but emissions have declined, as I've already said. In the ag sector, fertilizer use, whether it's organic or inorganic, grew dramatically after World War II. But by the 70s, the consumption was starting to level off. Efficiencies have been going up in that sector. But in the dairy sector, we've had rapid growth in dairy. We have the biggest dairy herd in the United States. We really don't know very much about what happens to the nitrogen that comes from all the manure that those dairy cattle produce. So kind of the core science of this was this big accounting of mass balance, so measuring all the sources coming into the state and the fate of every molecule of nitrogen that's coming into the state. Not at the molecular level, of course, at the gigaton level. But anyway, if we could just... And a little bit of chemistry. One of the things that's really interesting about nitrogen, which makes it harder to study than carbon, is you've got multimedia. And the different media, so the nitrogen gas is completely inert, doesn't do any harm, it's benign. Nitrous oxide, other nitrogen oxides, ammonia, and nitrate all involve combinations of advantages and disadvantages, whether you look at food production, human health, or the environment. Those are all different ways that those nitrogen atoms can end up in the environment, and it matters a great deal which path they take. This you can't read, but the big poster is over there. The point here is that it was a major undertaking just to figure out all these flows and to put magnitudes on them. And I think we can just skip over this one. These are the main messages. Synthetic nitrogen fertilizer is the largest input to the state of California in terms of nitrogen. Manure production, which in part derives from that synthetic nitrogen fertilizer going through the feed system, is the second largest nitrogen flow within the state. Biological nitrogen fixation on our wild-lands is completely overshadowed by human activity. Okay, so this is a human-driven system. Nitrous oxide production is a moderate pathway. That's the climate change link. The climate change link is less important than we originally thought when we started this. We don't know a lot about ammonia. One of the things that's a big feature of our climate and our geography is nitrogen deposition from atmospheric flows is very important, has particularly important effects on ecosystem services in wildlands. But the big headline is leaching from cropland into groundwater of nitrate is something like 1 in 4, 1 in 5 of those nitrogen atoms ends up going into our aquifers. Okay, so how does this matter for the way the ecosystem works and for how healthy and happy and prosperous people are? So on the well-being side, I mean, we wouldn't be California without California agriculture. It's an important part of our lifestyle here. It's also important to the rest of the United States in terms of very high nutritional value, fruits, vegetables, nuts, and increasingly is important globally. And, well, I've already made the point about the dairy, so you're right, Maria. Let's jump to the next one. And yet, all of that nitrate going into our aquifers ends up, it can be good applied to farm fields, but if people are drinking it, there are serious questions about the health effects. I'm not going to go through all of these. I just wanted to highlight one point of an assessment. So what our purpose is to do our best to answer the questions stakeholders have asked. But one of the values of the assessments is to flag when there's not sufficient evidence to have an answer. So unlike a referee journal article where if you don't have enough evidence, it doesn't get published, part of the purpose of an assessment is actually to flag important questions where we don't have enough evidence to make an intelligent decision. So you'll see that we, throughout the assessment, use very specific vocabulary about the level of uncertainty, going everything from well-established, which means lots of evidence and lots of consensus, to tentatively agree, which means a few experts kind of are on top of this, but it's not widely accepted. So we'll go to the next one. The future. Okay. So we gathered together a group of almost 3 dozen stakeholders to talk about looking ahead 20 years, what did they see as challenges and opportunities in managing nitrogen in agriculture in the state of California. There's a whole chapter on those 4 different scenarios that people came up with. Basically, the question is, how vibrant is the export economy going to be for our agricultural products? And what's the role of regulation going to be in the state? Is it going to be positive or not so positive. But the one thing that came out across all the scenarios, which are very wide range, is that none of them by themselves actually address the groundwater quality problem. That whatever we do, even if you shut down agriculture, because of the geology of nitrogen in groundwater, that problem doesn't go away. Okay. So, technologies and practices. This is one of the longest chapters in the assessment. You've seen many of those out in the field today. When we started this out, is Chris Kessel still here? Where's Chris? I remember, I thought I saw a hand go up. Maybe Chris had to leave. I remember the first organizing meeting, Chris said, there are shelves and shelves of technologies for managing nitrogen. That's not the problem. The problem is incentives and policies. Well, from day one, we knew that, but we still went through all of these kinds of options. Those are all documented. And they go through crop production, issues about manure management. Because of this particular challenge about drinking water, there is a separate question about how to deliver safe, drinkable water, especially for low-income rural communities, which is another technological issue that needs to be on the table. This may be a case where an ounce of cure is actually more effective than a pound of prevention. Next one. But it's really about the policies, because all of those technologies that I just jumped over, because the time is so short, they typically involve some combination of more costs for farmers, more challenges for farmers in terms of management and their attention, gaps in information, or all of the above, which is why you don't see as much adoption of those technologies as you might. So it brings us to policies. Well, I think I've already said this. The technologies and practices that can reduce nitrogen pollution in agriculture exist. Typically, they're costly, one way or another. Voluntary adoption under those circumstances is low. Farmers are in business. Okay, next one. We're going to be living with these groundwater consequences for decades to come, regardless of what we do. So we need to be thinking in terms of public policy to make sure that all Californians have access to safe drinking water, as really as a separate, narrower issue. And the main thing that comes out of this chapter, which was a very difficult one for us to prepare, and our colleague Ken Barenclough at University of California, Riverside did a superb job on this chapter, but we've got something in there to make everybody upset. So one group is going to be upset because the only really strong evidence we have on policy is that sort of if you just do voluntary compliance with extension, you're not going to get effects. But if you try to look at other ways of bringing some kind of cost-effective, efficient, not overly damaging sticks to put with the carrots, we have next to no evidence on how this would actually work. So if we're going to address these challenges more broadly over the longer term, we've got to start thinking more creatively and actually doing more applied work on institutional and policy approaches. And it's over to you. So, Mariah, you have 2 minutes.
Okay. So, as Tom mentioned, there are 8 chapters in the California Nitrogen Assessment. We are actually conducting a scientific review stage and also a stakeholder review stage. Scientific review is actually concluded for almost all of the chapters.
We can say it's done.
It's done.
Yeah.
And stakeholder review is currently underway. So if you look on the handout in your folder, I think on the back side there's some information about how you can participate in the stakeholder review for 3 of the chapters that are still in the stakeholder review. Those 3 chapters are the technological and practical responses, the policy and institutional responses, and the ecosystem services and human well-being chapter. So if you would like to participate in the stakeholder review, we recommend that you tune into our webinars. We've got one a week from today on the chapter 7, and then later in June we'll have chapter 8 and chapter 5 as well.
Okay. You're going to be here at lunchtime.
Yes.
Okay, so we're both going to be around if you want to ask questions. Sonia's here, Kate's here. There's the poster over there. And Emma says we can take one question.
I'll ask one.
Yeah, Bob.
Since the main issue is the over-application of synthetic nitrogen with leaches, why aren't we doing more research on biological nitrogen fixation since the air is 80% nitrogen? Why aren't we enhancing biological nitrogen fixation? Why are we still using inoculants that are 50 years old in research for legume research? Why are you planting legumes in solid stands instead of mixed stands? I mean, what are you doing to actually enhance biological nitrogen fixation? The most direct solution to your gigantic pile of information.
So we went over it very quickly, Bob. It turns out, and Will may want to come in on this, that in terms of leaching, for example, whether it's organic or synthetic, there's still problems. We're managing with very high levels of nitrogen. We don't know enough about how to prevent that leaching. Your point about why aren't we working on a much wider set of possible interventions and understanding them is very well taken. I don't dispute that.
Well, why aren't you doing it? I mean, this is 25 years of this research. There was zero take-home here about how to do biological nitrogen fixation. Zero.
So I think where you and I might differ is that what I'm hearing you say is that the things you saw this morning have no value.
I didn't say that. I said there was zero take-home about biological nitrogen fixation.
But we have choices to make about how much we can do across the board, right? Okay. I know I'm not going to satisfy you.